Nestled in the rolling hills outside a mid-sized American city, Windermere Heights was the kind of suburban enclave that boasted immaculate lawns, pristine sidewalks, and a tasteful uniformity in architectural design. The quiet, tree-lined streets gave the impression of serenity. Families strolled leisurely at dusk, neighbors exchanged polite waves, and children rode bikes on the cul-de-sacs without worry. The community, however, was not managed by gentle goodwill alone. A powerful homeowners association, an HOA, loomed over daily life, enforcing rules that went far beyond standard upkeep. Neighborhood bulletins arrived each month with new directives on what color flowers to plant, how high shrubs could grow, and even which days garbage bins could be placed curbside. To many longtime residents, these regulations felt more stifling than helpful, but they coped, wanting to preserve the peaceful veneer of Windermere Heights. Into this backdrop stepped a woman who had an unmatched zeal for rule enforcement, Darlene Whitmore, though many in hushed tones referred to her simply as Karen. In her early 50s, Darlene stood at an imposing 5'9", always dressed in pressed slacks and a neatly buttoned blouse. She carried an air of solemn authority, chin held high, her steely gaze scanning for infractions in every corner of the neighborhood. Darlene's obsession with absolute order led her to patrol the community at odd hours, scribbling notes in her clipboard about whose grass was half an inch too tall or whose front porch had unsightly clutter. A single garden gnome or a child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk could inspire her to dash off a sternly worded complaint. Some speculated that, for Darlene, being on the HOA board wasn't just a civic duty, it was the primary joy in her life. Yet, if one looked deeper than Windermere's manicured lawns, cracks formed under Darlene's watch. Parents worried about letting their children play freely, lest they earn the HOA's wrath. Teens whispered about Karen's endless vigilance, and older folks joked that they needed to measure their houseplants to avoid another citation. Within this pristine setting, tension simmered, just waiting for a single act to bring it roaring to the surface. Among the more recent arrivals to Windermere Heights were the Hayes family, Elena and Brian Hayes, along with their 11-year-old son, Kenny. They had chosen the neighborhood for its reputed safety and the pretty streets lined with well-tended maples. Elena was a software engineer, working partially from home, while Brian managed a local car dealership. Both were eager to settle into a place that seemed ideal for raising a child. Kenny, who teetered on the brink between childhood and adolescence, loved sports. His room overflowed with basketball-themed posters, trading cards, and shelves of trophies he had earned playing in a youth league at his old neighborhood. The day the Hayes family unpacked the last of their moving boxes, Kenny immediately asked about installing a small, portable basketball hoop in their driveway. After all, one of the Hayes' prime reasons for picking a house on Crescent Pine Road was that it had a wide, flat driveway where Kenny could dribble and shoot. Elena and Brian had promised him that once they settled in, they'd get a portable hoop so he could practice free throws and three-pointers to his heart's content. It seemed like a harmless plan, a typical suburban dream. A father rebounding for his son while the bright orange ball arced through the air, landing with a satisfying swish. When Elena mentioned this plan casually to a neighbor, she received a wary smile and a quick warning. Be careful, our HOA can be particular about everything. Elena shrugged it off. A portable basketball hoop was hardly a capital construction project. Surely nobody would mind a kid practicing a sport. But from that moment on, an invisible shadow loomed, the specter of Karen. Darlene Whitmore first laid eyes on the Hayes family one warm, late summer evening. She was conducting her infamous twilight inspection, clipboard in hand. The sun was just setting, and the street was aglow with a soft orange hue. Elena and Brian were outside, chatting with neighbors while Kenny bounced a basketball experimentally on the driveway. Though, at that moment, there was no hoop. Darlene slowed her purposeful stride and observed. She wore the slightly disapproving half-frown that had become her signature expression. Noticing her lingering presence, Elena offered a polite wave and said, "Hello. Good evening. We just moved in a few weeks ago. I'm Elena, and this is my husband, Brian." Without a smile, Darlene introduced herself. "I'm Darlene Whitmore, on the HOA board. I keep a close eye on the standards of our neighborhood. Are you aware of the guidelines regarding sports equipment?" Her eyes flicked to Kenny's ball. Brian and Elena exchanged uncertain glances. Well, we're pretty new, Elena said slowly. But we did review the basic HOA rules. I don't recall anything about basketball hoops, so we assumed it was fine. Darlene pursed her lips. We do have an addendum that states no permanent structures, like in-ground hoops, are allowed without prior approval. Portable hoops must not block sidewalks or create noise disturbances. I trust you'll be mindful of that. Her tone implied something more than her words. It felt like a veiled warning, a notice that the Hayes family had better toe the line. With that, Darlene moved on, resuming her patrol. The Hayes family exchanged looks of mild unease. It was the first sign that life in Windermere Heights might be more complicated than the glossy brochures suggested. A few days later, a delivery truck arrived with the portable basketball hoop the Hayes family had ordered online. Kenny could hardly contain his excitement. The system featured a steel rim, a durable plexiglass backboard, and a large plastic base designed to be filled with either water or sand to keep it stable. That evening, under the warm glow of porch lights, Elena and Brian assembled it while Kenny hovered, handing them screws and washers. Finally, they wheeled it into position on the left side of the driveway, so it wouldn't block the sidewalk. The base was carefully filled with water, and everything was double-checked for stability. With a triumphant grin, Kenny shot his first basket, the ball hitting the backboard with a crisp thump before swirling through the net. For the next hour, father and son traded shots while Elena cheered. Even a couple of passers-by complimented their new setup, remembering their own days of driveway hoops. It all seemed so normal, so benign. The faint squeak of sneakers on pavement and the hollow bounce of the basketball felt like the soundtrack of idyllic American suburban life. Unbeknownst to them, from her second-floor window across the street, Darlene watched. She'd known the Hayes family would do something like this. These new residents with their sports hobbies and carefree approach to noise. She stared, shoulders tense, noting each bounce, each clang against the backboard. Already, her mind whirred with ways to keep this nuisance under control. At first, the neighborhood reaction to Kenny's hoop was lukewarm, yet not hostile. Some older neighbors found the steady thud-thud-thud reminiscent of simpler times. A few parents with younger kids even considered getting hoops of their own. But in Windermere Heights, word and rumor traveled fast, and the one voice that consistently complained was Darlene's. By the end of the first week, an official HOA notice arrived in the Hayes family mailbox. It carried the distinctive letterhead with a stylized WH in the corner. The letter read, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, this notice serves as a reminder that noise disturbances in the community are closely monitored. Continuous basketball dribbling may disrupt neighbors' peace. Please ensure that your use of sports equipment does not extend into late hours or cause an unreasonable disturbance. Sincerely, the Windermere Heights HOA Board." Signed, D. Whitmore. Elena frowned at the letter. It struck her as odd, given that their driveway sessions usually ended by dinner time. They had never played past 7 o'clock or 7:30 p.m., hardly the late hours. Still, they tried to be sensitive. Kenny was instructed not to dribble too hard and to keep sessions short during typical quiet windows like early morning or evening. Yet even with these accommodations, the letters continued. Over the next couple of weeks, the Hayes family received 3 more polite but firm reminders about repeated noise complaints. Some neighbors implied that it all came from one person, Darlene, who evidently had an ear finely attuned to even the faintest basketball bounce. The tension built. The Hayes family grew uneasy, but they felt no explicit rule was being broken. Everyone else insisted it was only a matter of courtesy. Why should they be singled out, with so many families owning sports gear? At the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the modest community center near the entrance of Windermere Heights, the main agenda item was landscaping improvements. But about 20 minutes into the meeting, Darlene added noise from sports equipment to the discussion. She laid out a series of complaints about the proliferation of basketball hoops that could turn the neighborhood into a noisy playground. The handful of residents in attendance exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone knew this was about the Hayes family. One neighbor, a soft-spoken retiree, muttered, "Isn't that a bit of an exaggeration? There's just one new hoop so far." Darlene's eyes flashed. "It starts with one. Then we'll have them popping up on every street. Before long, the peace and quiet we cherish in Windermere Heights will be gone." Harriet Moore, an older board member who typically acted as the voice of reason, tried to mediate. Darlene, there's already a policy about not playing music or hosting loud events past certain hours. If the Hayes family abides by those guidelines, I'm not sure what new rule you're proposing. In a tone brimming with condescension, Darlene responded, I want an explicit policy that any sports equipment must be subject to board approval, especially if neighbors complain about noise. Otherwise, we lose the ability to maintain the calm environment that our residents pay for. Some neighbors bristled, but Darlene pressed on, brandishing typed notes and citing multiple resident concerns. While no immediate new rule was passed, the seeds were sown. Darlene was determined to rid the neighborhood of thudding balls. The Hayes family remained oblivious to how far she would go. They simply carried on, trusting that reason would prevail, never imagining that Darlene could escalate her mission beyond paperwork and letters. A few weeks after the contentious HOA meeting, it was mid-October and the weather was getting cooler. Kenny had a routine. Every Saturday morning, right after breakfast, he'd spend about an hour shooting around before heading off to other weekend plans. This particular Saturday, Elena was sipping coffee inside, occasionally glancing out the window to watch her son's progress, while Brian was busy in the garage. Kenny was perfecting his free-throw technique, focusing on form. The day was crisp, the leaves turning shades of orange and gold. Most of the neighbors were still cozied up indoors. The dribbling was gentle, and the morning sun cast a warm light over the driveway. It was an idyllic moment, the epitome of suburban calm. Little did Kenny know that across the street, Darlene stood by her living room window, tension etched across her brow. She had endured weeks of constant ball noise, which in reality amounted to 2 or 3 short sessions per week. Each bounce grated on her nerves. She had tried complaining to the other board members, but they only offered half-hearted support, concerned about overreach. Seething with frustration, Darlene vowed that day to take matters into her own hands. No more letters, no more half measures. She believed if the Hayes family insisted on defying her repeated pleas, she had every right, moral and otherwise, to intervene. They brought this upon themselves, she muttered, eyes fixed on the offending hoop. That afternoon, Darlene waited until the Hayes family was out, likely running errands, as they often did after lunch on Saturdays. She had carefully observed their routines. Once she was sure the coast was clear, she stepped out of her house, a small bucket of quick-drying cement in hand, and a trowel stuffed into a canvas tote bag. Her face was set in grim determination. Crossing the street, she glanced around to confirm no one was watching. Most neighbors were indeed gone or inside. She walked up to the Hayes driveway, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and self-righteousness. The portable hoop towered above her, the base filled with water to keep it stable. Darlene set the bucket down and snapped on rubber gloves, then crouched near the fill cap. Her plan was stark in its cruelty. She would empty the water, then pour the quick-setting cement inside. Once it hardened, the base would likely crack or become uneven, rendering the hoop unusable. She was certain that if she sabotaged the equipment, the constant bounce of the basketball would finally cease. This nuisance would be gone, and no one would be the wiser. She assumed the Hayeses would just assume their hoop had malfunctioned or was defective. As she poured the slurry into the base, it sloshed around with a gritty hiss. She heard her own breath echo in her ears. A faint thrill coursed through her. She was saving her neighborhood from noise, from the wild intrusion of street basketball. With trembling hands, she stuffed the empty cement bag back in her tote. Then, using the trowel, tried to smooth the mixture so it filled every cavity. She left just as quietly, certain she had done her civic duty. The next day, Sunday, dawned bright and breezy. Kenny woke up eager to squeeze in a quick shooting session before the family headed out to brunch. He ran outside, ball in hand, only to be met with a strange sight. The hoop stood at a precarious angle, the base bulging oddly. A thin line of gray substance had oozed out around the fill opening, dried into a crumbly crust. Bewildered, Kenny tried to steady the hoop. With a slight push, the plastic base gave a loud crack and partially split. Alarmed, he called inside for his parents. Elena and Brian rushed out to see the damage. They crouched next to the base, gingerly tapping the hardened interior. It felt like stone. Brian gently chipped at it with a screwdriver, dislodging chunks of fresh cement. Horror dawned on them. Someone had deliberately done this. At that moment, A neighbor from 2 doors down, Marco Benitez, jogged by with his dog. Spotting the commotion, he stopped. What on earth happened here? Elena explained, her voice tense. Marco shook his head, mouth agape. Why would anyone do that to a kid's basketball hoop? This is insane. Word spread quickly across Crescent Pine Road, then beyond. Neighbors were appalled. Even those who had once complained about minor noise found this act of sabotage frighteningly unhinged. Who would go so far as to vandalize a child's possession with cement? Could it have been bored teenagers? A random act of mischief? Or, as some quietly suspected, was this the handiwork of the infamous HOA Karen, who had so openly despised the bouncing ball? That afternoon, the Hayes family filed a police report. An officer came by to document the damage, though the likelihood of pressing charges without direct proof or eyewitnesses seemed slim. The officer asked if they had security cameras. Unfortunately, the Hayes family's newly installed cameras were pointed toward the porch and garage, leaving the hoop's base area just out of frame. An uneasy hush fell over Windermere Heights. In the past, petty disputes over lawn lengths or holiday decorations never escalated to outright vandalism. Many residents started checking their own doorbell cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of suspicious activity. Some posted on the neighborhood social media group, demanding an explanation. Darlene watched from her window as outrage swelled, a stone of guilt settling in her stomach. She had not anticipated such a vigorous reaction. She had believed the Hayes family would quietly discard the broken hoop, no questions asked. In her mind, it was a harmless sabotage, akin to trimming a weed, perhaps. But seeing the shock and sadness on neighbors' faces, especially Kenny's, stirred something resembling remorse deep within her. Yet her outward resolve did not waver. She refused to step forward or claim responsibility. If anything, she doubled down on the idea that the basketball mania was detrimental to the neighborhood. At an emergency HOA meeting called that week, residents demanded answers. Harriet Moore, always the mediator, tried to keep order. Murmurs and side conversations filled the room. This is outrageous. Who would do such a thing? My kids wanted a hoop too. Now I'm scared. We can't let our neighborhood devolve into vandalism and fear. Darlene remained composed. She expressed sympathy for the Hayeses, but pivoted to reassert her stance that sports equipment can be disruptive, and perhaps it was an outsider or bored teenagers. Some neighbors cast suspicious glances her way, but had no proof. The board promised to cooperate with the investigation, and the meeting adjourned with tension so thick it was palpable. Despite the gloom, a silver lining emerged. Shocked by the extent of the vandalism, neighbors resolved to show the Hayes family, and especially young Kenny, that they didn't condone such behavior. People began dropping by with warm cookies, friendly notes of encouragement, and even new basketballs as tokens of solidarity. Don't lose hope, one neighbor told Kenny. Not everyone is like that. Another offered to help repair the hoop, though Brian suspected the base was beyond saving. After an attempt to chisel out the hardened cement, they realized the plastic had fractured in multiple spots. The entire unit was ruined. All they could salvage was the rim and its net, which were still intact. Elena gazed at the broken apparatus, her heart aching not just for the destroyed hoop, but for her son's disillusionment. This was supposed to be their dream neighborhood. Now it felt fraught with suspicion and negativity. But the outpouring of kindness from other residents renewed her determination. In private chats, some neighbors floated a bold idea. If someone hated the sound of bouncing balls in driveways, maybe the solution was to create a dedicated place for kids and teens to play. There was a small, underutilized corner lot near the back of Windermere Heights, HOA property with a patch of grass and a few benches. What if they turned it into a half-court, a designated area for basketball? That way, kids wouldn't have to dribble in their driveways, reducing noise near homes. The rumor of such an idea spread, and many found themselves intrigued. Spurred by the sense of community and the fresh idea of building a place for recreational play, a small committee of neighbors formed. They called themselves the Windermere Heights Play Committee, led by Harriet Moore and Marco Benitez, among others. They approached the HOA with a proposition: allocate funds to transform the little-used corner lot into a modest basketball half-court, complete with a single official hoop and painted lines. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Use HOA funds, to which everyone contributed, for part of the construction costs. Accept volunteer labor and donations from residents for the rest. Salvage the rim and net from Kenny's destroyed hoop, symbolically giving it new life as the heart of the community court. During the next official board meeting, Harriet presented the proposal. She framed it as a solution that would remove the thudding ball noise from driveways while giving kids and teens a safe spot to play. She added that having a dedicated sports area might also improve property values, as families appreciate neighborhoods with recreational amenities. Darlene could barely hide her annoyance. She realized that her sabotage had not only failed to eliminate basketball, it had inspired a bigger, more formal project. If she argued against the court, she risked revealing her vendetta against the sport and stoking suspicion that she had orchestrated the vandalism. With a tight smile, she offered superficial support, inquiring politely about costs and scheduling. Inside, her frustration boiled. She yearned to find a way to stop this. Yet she was cornered by public opinion and the new wave of unity in Windermere Heights. Plans moved rapidly. Within weeks, volunteers gathered on weekend mornings, armed with shovels, rakes, and wheelbarrows. A local concrete company owned by a sympathetic neighbor offered discounted materials. Harriet coordinated the entire effort with methodical efficiency, while Marco oversaw the actual layout, using chalk lines to mark the dimensions of a standard half-court. In a gesture that touched everyone, Brian Hayes and Kenny brought the salvaged rim, once attached to the ill-fated portable hoop. The base, long since thrown away, would no longer hamper the boys' dream of shooting baskets. Instead, the rim was attached to a brand-new backboard, mounted on a sturdy steel pole that would be set in concrete. As a crowd watched on a chilly Saturday morning, volunteers raised the backboard assembly and guided it into position. Applause broke out spontaneously when it was secure. Children hopped in excitement, and even some elderly neighbors clapped with genuine glee. Darlene had come to observe, arms crossed, lips pressed in a taut line. She contributed nothing but the occasional cold stare. Residents greeted her politely, but there was a subtle undercurrent of wariness. No one forgot her previous crusade against the Hayes family's noise. Nevertheless, she bit her tongue, offering no arguments. The unstoppable momentum behind the new court made resistance futile. For the finishing touch, Harriet and Elena walked the perimeter with a tape measure, ensuring that the lines for free throws, three-pointers, and half-court boundaries were marked accurately. A volunteer group of teenagers painted the lines in bright white, their laughter echoing joyfully. In that moment, the corner lot that had once been neglected and overgrown became a site of hopeful transformation. By mid-November, the half-court stood complete. The asphalt had been laid, the painted lines had dried, and the net dangled from the resurrected rim, swaying gently in the breeze. The community decided to hold a small ribbon-cutting ceremony, a playful gesture that signaled a new chapter for Windermere Heights. On that brisk Saturday afternoon, a modest crowd gathered to celebrate. Harriet held a pair of oversized scissors, snipping a ribbon stretched across the front of the court. Applause and cheers erupted. The scene felt electric. Neighbors united, proud to have taken a negative act and turned it into something beneficial for everyone. Elena guided Kenny forward, ball in hand. With a mix of excitement and nerves, the 11-year-old dribbled to the free throw line. Silence descended as he set his feet, bent his knees, and released the ball in a graceful arc. It bounced around the rim before dropping through the net with a satisfying whoosh. The crowd erupted in cheers. Kenny's grin lit up his face, and tears glistened in Elena's eyes. A wave of children and teens then rushed onto the court, shooting and passing the ball around, shrieks of joy filling the crisp air. Parents chatted on the sidelines, sipping hot chocolate provided by a local diner that had donated refreshments for the opening. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment for the neighborhood newsletter. In the corner, Darlene lingered, her posture stiff. She offered a weak, forced smile as if to maintain an appearance of unity, yet inside, a swirl of resentment mixed with reluctant acceptance. In the following weeks, the half-court blossomed into a community hub. Teens gathered there after school, forging friendships and staying out of trouble. Younger kids practiced under parental supervision on weekends, and occasionally, even a few adults organized friendly pickup games. Instead of hearing random dribbling in driveways across the neighborhood, the collective sound of basketballs now converged in one designated area. ironically bringing more activity than ever. Darlene's secret guilt gnawed at her. Each time she saw the court in use, she recalled her underhanded act of pouring cement into a little boy's hoop base. She was relieved no one had pinned the crime on her, but the weight of carrying such a secret in a now tightly knit community was immense. She found herself shutting her curtains more often, avoiding small talk with neighbors. Meanwhile, Harriet, who had begun to suspect Darlene's involvement, subtly probed. She noticed how uncomfortable Darlene grew whenever the topic arose, how she changed the subject swiftly if the vandalism was mentioned. Harriet wasn't one to escalate conflicts without evidence, though. She reasoned that the best outcome was that the sabotage had ironically backfired, inspiring something beneficial for everyone. Perhaps that, in itself, was cosmic justice. Months passed, winter yielded to spring, and the new half-court became more than just a space to shoot hoops. It turned into a de facto gathering spot for local events. A group of teens painted a mural celebrating Windermere Heights on the wall facing the court. Parents organized a Saturday skills clinic, inviting a volunteer high school basketball coach to give pointers to younger kids. Even older couples walked by to observe the lively scene and occasionally reminisce about their own youthful days playing ball. The Hayes family's initial heartbreak over the destroyed hoop had given way to a deeper appreciation for their community. They discovered that the majority of Windermere Heights residents were kind, fair-minded folks who refused to let one person's bitterness define their neighborhood. As for Karen, Darlene Whitmore, her influence waned. She still held a seat on the HOA board, but her reputation had been tarnished by the intense suspicion around the sabotage. Feeling sidelined, she avoided eye contact at meetings, no longer as quick to brandish citations. Ironically, the very quiet she had claimed to value was now broken daily by the laughter and camaraderie echoing from the half-court, sounds she had tried so hard to muzzle. In the end, the sabotage of one child's basketball hoop led to the creation of a full teen hangout and consistent sports gatherings, an outcome no one would have predicted. Windermere Heights, once threatened by a single destructive act, had rallied and emerged stronger, forging a communal spirit in the face of adversity. On a warm spring evening, Kenny Hayes, now 12, jogged to the half-court for a quick game with friends. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in pink and orange. The rhythmic bounce of basketballs reverberated through the air, mingling with the giggles of children playing. Neighbors, strolling past, smiled at the sight. And in a window across the street, a figure stood behind a lace curtain, watching in silence. Her eyes flickered with something, perhaps regret, perhaps resignation. But the joy of the neighborhood persisted, unstoppable and triumphant. And so it was that a spiteful act intended to silence a single ball had unleashed a chorus of bouncing basketballs, weaving the community closer together than ever before.